West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
And Senator Warnock of Georgia joins us now. It's great to have you on the show this morning. I'll start with the personal. I just want to know what it was like to make that speech in the position that you are in, historic position.
Well, good morning, Mika. It is great to be with you. I must tell you that to have the people of Georgia stand up in the way that they did in December and in November and in January, 5 million voters and then 4.4 Georgia voters turned out in a runoff. To send me and my friend and brother John Ossoff to the United States Senate is the honor of my life. You know, when I was born in Georgia, Georgia was represented by Richard B. Russell and Herman E. Talmadge, arch segregationists who were unabashed adversaries of civil rights and voting rights. But because Americans of all races stood up, all of these years later, I sit in the seat where Herman E. Talmadge sat. This is America. We've had to stand up for our democracy before, and we must stand up for it right now. Voting rights is preservative of all rights, and that's what my speech was about.
So how important is it for you that your fellow Democrats get on board and work together, doing whatever has to be done to make sure that H.R. 1 and also John Lewis's voting rights bill pass the United States Senate, pass the House, and get signed by this Democratic president?
It is almost impossible to overstate how important this really is. We are at an inflection point. This is a moral moment in America, a defining moment in our history. Voting rights is not just one issue alongside other issues. It is about who we say we are. It is about our covenant with one another as an American people. And so we've got to get on board. I know there's a big debate about the filibuster. I'm sure we're going to have that debate. But my argument is that voting rights is bigger than the filibuster, and we must pass voting rights whether we get rid of the filibuster or not.
Mr. Senator, it's Willie Geist. Great to have you on the show this morning. I do want to ask you about how you get this through. You mentioned the potential for eliminating the filibuster. Your colleague on the House side, James Clyburn, has said on questions of civil rights, we need to get this through however we do it, even if that means putting aside some of the historic rules of the Senate and pushing the filibuster away. Do you agree that an elimination of the filibuster is needed to get this through?
I think that when it comes to voting rights, all options have to be on the table. We've seen carve-outs before with respect to the courts. So what could be more important than making sure that the voices of the American people are not squeezed out of their own democracy? And so, we should have 100 votes in the Senate for voting rights. It used to be a bipartisan issue. The last time we reauthorized the 1965 Voting Rights Act, George W. Bush was president, and it passed this same Senate 98-0. What changed? And so what I hope to do is to appeal to the conscience of all of my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans. I believe in democracy. Reinhold Niebuhr was right. Humankind's inclination for justice makes democracy possible. Our inclination for injustice makes democracy necessary. We have to preserve the republic. There are politicians who are trying to win at any cost, even the cost of the democracy itself. We have to stand up in this defining moment and say that this is who we are as an American people. We believe in the democratic process. And I say that knowing that there will be moments when this side or that side will win or lose. But we have to cast our lots with the people. The republic belongs to the people and not to the politicians.
Senator Claire McCaskill has a question for you. Claire?
Good morning, Senator. I can't tell you how terrific it is to see you and to see you on the floor of the Senate giving a powerful speech about voting rights. You know, you're not from a bright blue state. And I want to just pose to you the question, how do we knit together the people who come from states like yours? And those are some Republicans, too. I mean, we've got Pat Toomey in a state that Joe Biden won. We have Ron Johnson in a state that Joe Biden won. How do we bring together those of you that are not from bright blue or bright red places to actually move the needle in a way that creates lasting change instead of having a situation where it goes back and forth based on who's got 50? Have you had an opportunity to sit down and talk with other senators that are from states like yours about a way forward that doesn't leave people of moderate states behind?
Well, here's the thing, Claire. We have got to give ourselves over to something larger than ourselves. I think that what we are dealing with right now is the ambition of politicians. I mean, look at the American people. When it comes to this COVID-19 relief package that we just passed, there is bipartisan support for the package, but that's not reflected in the vote that we saw just 2 weeks ago. It's not reflected here in this Capitol. There's a disconnect between where the American people are and what's happening in Washington right now. And if we let them crush our voting rights, if we let them move forward with this kind of partisan and racial gerrymandering that we will see increasingly if we don't pass federal legislation, we're going to find an increasing disconnect between where the people are and what happens in this House. And so I think in a real sense, we've got to stand up, we've got to save our democracy. And as the other side keeps pushing these terrible voter suppression tactics, then with an eye toward continuing to draw these lines and gerrymandering of districts in such a way, we're going to see them draw themselves into a kind of increasing irrationality, extremism, and irrelevance.
It is Thursday, the 18th of March of 2021. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Just a program note, or show notes and links diary note. There is a recipe for the Metro Shrimp and Grits for Thursdays on the Thursday diary, so check it out. Yep. Put it up a few times and for pay even. So go ahead, do it. It's Thursday. Why not? Alrighty. Well, yes, the tragic news out of Atlanta continues. It's maddening as well. When you realize how systemic the racism is throughout law enforcement. Now, I know you're not supposed to call it systemic, especially when the cops hear you say the word. Boy, do they get angry at you. And the reason for it is that every racist hates to be exposed as a racist. Some of them just, I suppose we could say, well, why don't they just admit it? They used to. And they had a whip, a lash, and laws to enslave people. So, I don't know if I want to go down that road just so that they're honest with themselves. But I would actually, to be honest with you, just as a tangent, I'd prefer for them to scurry back into the cracks of whatever, I don't know, fungal, infected piece of woodwork that they happen to come from. Okay. And anyway, the cops don't like it when you bring up systemic racism. They will not admit that it exists anywhere, and they want you to give an example. So you give them examples like this Atlanta cop spokesperson selling T-shirts that are, well, pretty damn racist against Asians specifically. So, yeah, but I guess that's not racist. No, that's just entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. Everything's for sale, even your soul. The problem is that these people sell their soul out for so little. They're bottom feeders. I mean, if you're going to sell out your soul, at least go for the big bucks. Come on. Jeez, these people. Bottom feeders is an apt description. And now I'm going to have a lot of people telling me that bottom feeders have, well, yeah, they do. But you know what I mean. These are the low of the low. They'll eat feces, probably their own, if it means that they'll make a buck and, go up the social ladder, even though they're bottom feeders. Well, it's more than a social ladder. This guy, what is it about these people? And this is another thing. I think that if you've worked for Blackwater, like this Atlanta cop did, you shouldn't be able to be in law enforcement. Because let's remember what Blackwater is all about. We might remember them for shooting up Nisour Square, for whatever, how many contractors. And they just filled this intersection with lead. And they killed scores of Iraqi civilians, little kids. Why? Because they're cowboys. Shoot up the square, kill a bunch of people, and we'll get a pardon later. And they did. So a lot of times people think of Blackwater from that, and rightfully so. But let's also remember that Blackwater, run by Eric Prince, let's not forget Eric Prince in all of this, was laundering arms money from hostile foreign nations during a war. Oh, was it just a police action? Same thing. So let's remember what Blackwater is when you hear the term Blackwater Sheriff, Blackwater Cop. When you work for Blackwater, I would presume you should be precluded from ever being in law enforcement, ever. I mean, if you were part of ISIS, do you think you'd get a job? I don't think so. So, just because Eric Prince is like an American, and he's rubbed elbows with some of the most prominent fascists in America, doesn't mean that his company or his employees, former or otherwise, should have any place in American government. There's a purge that has to go on, and we've all been talking about. Well, at least I have. I'm sorry. I've been deluging you. Yeah, a deluge with this call to hold these folks to account. But we really do need a purge on all levels. There's no place anymore in American government for white nationalists. There is no more place for these insurgents who want to destroy America. You can only be an insurgent once the political class gets involved, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the other, what I call the dirty Nazi dozen, who voted against giving medals to the Capitol Police because they didn't like the word insurrection. in the bill or the act, the proclamation. It has insurrection. That wasn't an insurrection. That was peaceful protests. Yeah, right. The dirty Nazi dozen voted against medals for the cops that saved their lives because they didn't feel their lives needed to be saved because they're part of the insurgency. Well, it was the insurrection. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe the FBI, that's the FBI term. It was an insurrection. Those people are being charged for an insurrection, those protesters that captured the Capitol. And they got help from the dirty Nazi dozen, didn't they? So maybe they're upset that it should be called an insurgency because once the Capitol was breached, and once the dirty Nazi dozen, that's just the Senate, by the way. The dirty Nazi dozen said, oh, that's not an insurrection anymore because we're part of it. Nancy has just left the chamber. I know that was a House member, but still, you know what I mean. Anyway, so you got insurgents in the House, insurgents in the Senate. I'm looking at you, Ted. You're not going to get out of this either, Cruz. You're not going to cruise out of this one. No, no, no. It then became an insurgency once the political class became involved. Insurrection, it's sort of like a populist type of thing, you know. A bunch of lone wolves gather together in the meadow in the spring, and the next thing you know, they're trying to overturn the government. Which is, I don't know, give a repug a tax break. Next thing you know, they want to overthrow an election violently too. Don't give them any more tax cuts. Look how it ends up. So we have these insurgents trying to dictate what's going to go on, even to the point of refusing to. The Capitol Police did and are going to get their medals. I mean, they did pass. But by dint of the fact that these insurgents are actually exposing themselves as being members of the insurgency by voting the way they did so blatantly, exposed for the whole world to see, says something, doesn't it? Yeah, they can just, they feel they can keep saying the N-word right out in the open again, and they still are. Now, couple that with what happened in the House, too, when you have 172 Republicans. I call them repugs for short, since they have every pejorative about anything about us. Okay? Pejorative upon pejorative. So I'm calling them repugs for short. 172. When the vote came up for the Violence Against Women Act, 172 repugs voted for the wife beaters. They want the wife beaters to have rights to be able to beat up their wives. Okay. So then you got this, not a kid. Let's get over this, not a kid. Now, I know, to me, kids are in their 40s because, that's how it is when you get old. But this 21-year-old man, let's be clear, he wasn't 12 playing in the snow by himself, okay? And he also wasn't black. We all know that. Did that Blackwater cop, did the Blackwater cops that apprehended this guy, did they get him a Whopper with cheese on the way to the jailhouse? I was wondering. Sure sounded like they did. But the excuse for this murderer's actions is that he was having a bad day. Now, there's been some analysis that the Blackwater cop wasn't making that as his judgment. He was just repeating what the perp said. Having a bad day. That he was so sex addicted. And he comes from a very religious family. Oh, quiet, a loner. carries a Bible around everywhere he went. Yeah, well, even before he became a mass killer, I'd be suspecting that guy's going to be a mass killer. That's usually a telltale sign. So they're trying to convince us. I'm going to just cut to the chase here. They're trying to convince us that this perp, this murderer, this racist, Bible thumper, sex addicted, drove past a bunch. There was a count, half a dozen or more, just at one spot, half a dozen or more biker strip joints that he bypassed. Hair salons where women hang out. But he went to the Asian places specifically to shoot them up because it wasn't racist. He was just having a bad day. Yeah. Okay, I just want to make sure I got that right, and I know exactly where it's going. We need to purge Nazis, white nationalists, and the KKK. Proud Boys, 3%ers, I'm looking at you, out of law enforcement. And, in fact, out of our intelligence and defense departments as well. Now, if I was Poet Philosopher King running the show, things would be markedly different. But I'm enlightened enough to know that representative democracy is the way to go. Not fascism, so we need a purge. What's on the rest of the menu here on the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, that was Senator Warnock, insisting that voting rights is bigger than the filibuster. And Mitch McConnell, you're threatening us with a scorched earth Senate? My God, have you looked at it? Have you looked what you have wrought, Mr. Grim Reaper of the graveyard where democracy goes to die? How much more scorched earth do you think you can get? Come on, we've learned to live with it. I think we've been able to scurry into our little webby holes to survive the onslaught of, well, whatever meteoric onslaught that you will rot. I'll get through it. On the rest of the menu, former Border Patrol agents say the agency is going rogue and using kids to undermine Biden. I'm shocked. After calling them corrupt, Republicans voted in secret to bring back earmarks. Yeah, because I guess they fear for their lives. And white supremacist propaganda surged to alarming levels across the U.S. in 2020. No wonder the monster makers are voting in private so that no one can see. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where President, we love to say that word now here at Netroots Radio. In fact, the Netroots Radio style manual has been updated to include the P word, President, to the current occupant of the White House, and that is Joe Biden. President Joe Biden marked St. Patrick's Day by recommitting the U.S. to the Good Friday Agreement with Ireland, if you didn't know what the Good Friday Agreement was. And some sad news. Sister Janice McLaughlin, a Maryknoll Sisters nun who was jailed and later deported by the white minority-ruled Rhodesia for exposing human rights abuses, has died at age 79. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. Please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. If you could afford an espresso type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, it allows us to pay our bills. And then when we pay our bills, we somehow are able to fly under the radar. And we've been doing this for 10 years, so we're pretty good at it. And that allows us then to fulfill our civic duty as Resistance Broadcast Internet Radio, as the founders originally intended so many years ago. 10 years we've been doing this, 24/7, 365, and we've been able to do it because of your generosity. Thank you. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and thank you, Tom. You can also follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, of course, and I post the show notes and links diary about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up and published on social media platforms like Twitter, mostly, and all those other ones too, and you know who they are. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found mixed in with all the rest of us. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays is by Amy Liu out of the American Independent. A former Border Patrol agent claimed that the agency could be keeping unaccompanied minors at its holding facilities for longer than necessary in an effort to undermine the Biden administration and punish the children. Cruelty is the point, you know. Jen Budd, a former agent who now works as an immigration rights activist with the Southern Border Communities Coalition, claimed in an explosive interview with the UK Independent that the law enforcement agency, which intercepts those attempting to cross into the U.S., was allegedly creating its own internal crisis by holding unaccompanied immigrant children at Border Patrol stations for lengthy periods of time. It does not take that long to process children, she told the outlet, adding separately, this is a planned, coordinated attempt to sabotage the Biden administration. But also recalled an exchange she had with agents in 2019. I asked them why it was taking them so long to process. It didn't take that long even when I had to handwrite everything back in the day, and they would say, we're trying to teach them a lesson. Meaning the kids. Nothing has changed from the Trump administration in that respect, she claimed. They do this on purpose. The same people who separated families and created the last crisis are doing it again. Border Patrol officials did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the allegations because they're the Border Patrol. Recently, there have been reports of a growing number of immigrants crossing the U.S. southern border, something Republicans have seized on to accuse the Biden administration of mismanagement and bad policy. Right. Lawmakers have tried to turn the issue into an all-out war with the White House, even utilizing language that describes the situation as beyond a border crisis because, you know, bin Laden has risen from the dead and he's bringing, whole platoons of ISIS zombies across the southern border. Because of Joe's mismanagement? You know, I really hate the fact that these, I'll call them traitors, because when you got Kevin McCarthy down there spouting off these Russian talking points, using the immigrant crisis, asylum seekers, let's remind ourselves, okay? They are asylum seekers. Using those Russian propaganda tropes to undermine Joe Biden. I keep telling everybody, I know we didn't declare war on Russia. Russia declared war on us. Josh Israel of the American Independent brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The House Republican Conference voted by secret ballot to let its members resume requesting earmarks under some circumstances. The move comes after Republicans decried earmarks as corrupt and bragged about banning them. Politico reported that the vote by the caucus was 102 in favor, with 84 against on a resolution offered by Representative Mike Rogers of Alabama. It will allow House Republicans to obtain earmarks as long as they are disclosed publicly, are justified in writing, and present no ethical conflicts of interest. Sort of like how they were before. When Congress passes appropriations, it determines how much money goes to each agency and program. For years, its members had allocated portions of those funds, called earmarks, to specific projects and contractors, typically in their own states and districts, rather than leave those decisions to the executive branch. But, they had to change that. The Republicans did. Why? Because of small government. Supporters believe that system gave Congress more of a say in where money went and made deal-making easier. Critics say it fueled corruption and waste, as we have experienced in the 10 years that, they did it. After a moratorium on earmarks urged by Republicans in 2011, the Democratic House majority announced on February 16th that it would bring back the system, including in the proposal safeguards to ensure earmarks go only to public institutions and nonprofit organizations. Several House Republicans had blasted Democrats for the decision, suggesting they were returning to a corrupt system of pork. And some longtime GOP lawmakers opposing the return of earmarks had themselves made use of the system. Prior to the adoption of the earmark ban, Republicans were the beneficiaries of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of them. And according to Taxpayers for Common Sense data, McCarthy, yes, Kevin Moscow McCarthy, requested more than $44 million in earmarks between 2008 and 2010. 2 years. Whereas Scalise, that little pocket Mussolini, obtained more than $19 million in earmarks in the same time. Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, is Out of the Associated Press by Aaron Morrison. White supremacist propaganda reached alarming levels across the U.S. in 2020, according to a new report that the Anti-Defamation League provided to the Associated Press. There were 5,125 cases of racist, anti-Semitic, anti-LGBTQ, and other hateful messages spread through physical flyers, stickers, banners, and posters, according to the report. That's nearly double the 2,724 instances reported in all of 2019. Online propaganda is much harder to quantify, and it's likely those cases reached into the millions, the anti-hate organization said. The ADL, which was founded more than a century ago, said that last year marked the highest level of white supremacist propaganda seen in at least a decade. Its report comes as federal authorities investigate and prosecute those who stormed the U.S. Capitol in January, some of whom are accused of having ties to or expressing support for hate groups and anti-government militias. As we try to understand and put in perspective the past 4 years, we will always have these bookends of Charlottesville and Capitol Hill, the group's CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, said. The reality is there's a lot of things that happen in between those moments that set that stage. Christian Picciolini, a former far-right extremist who founded the de-radicalization group Free Radicals Project, said the surge in propaganda tracks with white supremacist and extremist recruiters seeing crises as periods of opportunity. Propaganda, often distributed with the intention of garnering media and online attention, helps white supremacists normalize their message and bolster recruitment efforts, the ADL said in its report. Language used in the propaganda is frequently veiled with a patriotic slant, making it seem benign to an untrained eye. Which just goes to show we better teach the 1619 Project in the schools, otherwise the lies will continue, the hate will increase, and representative democracy will be further in peril. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Sarah Vitak. Someone who knows how can pick a lock using just a paperclip. But how about with a smartphone? Researchers at the National University of Singapore wondered if smartphone audio of a key turning inside a lock could be used to figure out the shape of that key. And, spoiler alert, under the right conditions, they could create a few very good candidate keys, including the correct key. Soundarya Ramesh, a grad student who led the work on the project, which the researchers called SpyKey, said that the work was inspired by some previous research where the movement of smartwatches on people's wrists was used to figure out the code of combination locks.
Essentially, what they did was they were looking at smartwatches on your wrist in order to infer the pin to the combination lock. So in some sense, they're able to measure the angle, right? So we were like, okay, wait, people are doing this for combination locks. Maybe like there are some, similar insights that we can apply to other kinds of locks. And the most prevalent kind of locks is these kind of physical locks and keys.
The first task for the team was to get audio from a key opening a lock and to see if they could pull useful information out of that audio.
Whenever you insert a key into a lock, it produces a series of click sounds.
The pins of the lock moving over the ridges of the key is what produces the clicks.
Which is not really audible for the human ear because it's too close to be resolvable. But when you hear it from a high-quality microphone, you can actually clearly hear these click sounds.
Once they verified that getting this series of clicks out of the audio was possible, they moved on to using simulations. And that's because for the type of lock that they chose, the quote-unquote key space, or the number of possible unique keys, was 586,584. And they wanted to test how this type of analysis would work on every possible key. So instead of getting actual audio for 586,000 keys, they just simulated where the clicks would be in those audio recordings.
SpyKey was like the best case analysis for an attacker. So if he manages to get all the click information precisely, then this is how the results would be.
Using the time between each click and some clever geometry, the researchers attempted to figure out the shape of each key. Immediately, about half of the possible keys were deemed unattackable, And that's because some of the clicks that those keys would produce would overlap with each other. This left about 330,000 potential key shapes. More analysis was able to narrow down each sound signature to just a handful of key patterns. The research was presented at ACM's Hot Mobile 2020, which is a computer science research conference. The strategy is a long way from being viable in the real world. For one thing, it relies on the key being inserted at a constant speed. And for another, the audio element has a lot of challenges, like background noise.
The main point of this work was not really to say, stop using these keys because they're not really good. It's more about just being aware of what keys we're using, what locks we're using. So I think being aware of what is actually on your front door is very important.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Sarah Vitak.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For an expectant mother, taking care of her developing baby means taking good care of herself. One way she can do this is by ensuring she gets vaccinated. If a woman is or might be pregnant during flu season, it's especially important to get her annual flu shot, preferably before the end of October. In addition, women should be vaccinated against whooping cough during the 3rd trimester of each pregnancy. Failure to get vaccinated places both mother and baby at increased risk for serious complications of these infections, including hospitalization and even death. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, ask your healthcare provider when you should get your vaccines. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
As the days get longer and the weather warms, people of all ages will start to spring into action. Spring is a great time to breathe fresh air, stretch your arms and legs, and get physically active outdoors. Lack of physical activity contributes to obesity, heart disease, stroke, and other chronic health conditions. Fortunately, many communities are making it easier and safer to be physically active. Neighborhoods across the country are working together to create more public spaces for walking, running, biking, and other physical activities. Adults should get at least 150 minutes of physical activity each week, and children should get 60 minutes a day. If you find it hard to walk to a local recreation center, park, or playground, learn how to make your neighborhood a place that makes healthy living easier. Visit makinghealtheasier.org for information about ways communities can change to get more people outside and moving.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
This Civil Liberties Minute remembers Diana Ortiz, the American nun who was tortured in Guatemala. If there are kids around, you probably should turn off your radio or device right now. It was 1989, and Sister Diana was serving as a missionary in the western highlands of Guatemala, teaching indigenous children. Guatemala was under the thumb of a right-wing military dictatorship that targeted indigenous people. Sister Ortiz was abducted by a Guatemalan security force who repeatedly gang-raped her and burned her back with cigarettes in more than 100 places. And then they hung her by her wrists over a pit filled with bodies of men, women, and children, mostly dead, but some still alive, and some decapitated. Years later, she still smelled those decapitated bodies in that pit. The rapes made her pregnant, and she had an abortion. There was even worse torture, and it only stopped because an American who appeared to be in charge eventually ordered her release. Sister Diana lived and became an advocate known worldwide for victims of torture. Her case helped reveal decades-long American covert action in Guatemala, and declassified documents revealed that Guatemala security forces, equipped and trained by the United States, had committed acts of genocide. A friend of Sister Diana's described her as a woman of incredible courage and integrity who literally came back from the dead. Sister Diana Ortiz passed in February of 2021 from cancer at the age of 62. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
When corporate executives are absurdly hypocritical, yet so obtuse that they don't even realize it, is it still hypocrisy, or are they just dim-witted? Consider the histrionics emanating from corporate bunkers over rising public approval for the idea that nature might be given legal rights that are enforceable in courts. The Rights of Nature movement argues that if, say, a mining conglomerate decapitates a mountain, that injured citizen of our natural world ought to have its day in court. Outrageous, shriek the honchos of corporate America. The courts are for people, not for pieces of property. Hello, hypocrisy. After all, a corporation is not a person. It has no brain, no pulse, no soul, no life. It's not even a real piece of property, just an inert document printed by a state. Yet, the owners of that piece of paper claim that it magically bestows personhood on their syndicate, giving it the legal and political rights of real people. Yet these paper people now cry that Earth's actual living creatures can't have any legal rights because they're just property. Excuse me, but a single drop of water has more life in it than all the corporations in the world. Also, let's note that the long evolution of law even had to be enlightened to recognize that such property as slaves were human beings with fundamental rights. The body of legal and moral rights has grown, and it enhances our own humanity to recognize that we and nature are one. Crass corporate exploitation, on the other hand, diminishes all living things, threatening life itself. This is Jim Hightower saying, those who mock the idea of legal standing for marshes, grasslands, forest networks, and other wildlife might consider taking a moment by a quiet stream in the woods to ponder the question, does nature need us, or do we need her?
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day workers at Wagner Electric in St. Louis ended their 12-day walkout in exchange for promised negotiations regarding union recognition, higher wages, and fewer work hours. Wagner held defense contracts to provide detonators and firing pins for munitions. With the U.S. entrance into World War I, the orders increased, as did the labor shortage. In this instance, more women entered the workforce. Wagner was no exception. During this period, nearly a quarter of the St. Louis factory workers were female. Yet, the unionized industries made no attempt to organize them. Amid a strike that rocked the city, about 1,000 men and women struck at Wagner on March 6th. They demanded the reinstatement of co-workers who had been fired for attending a machinist union meeting. A week later, close to 2,700 workers were on strike. The male workers at Wagner made less than half of their counterparts in the unionized industries, while their women co-workers made half of that. Workers contended that Wagner violated federal contracts by refusing to honor the 8-hour workday and equal pay for equal work. Historian Rosemary Furrer notes the Ordnance Department reached a tentative deal to get workers back to the job, and then spiked negotiations by smearing strikers as unpatriotic. The company refused to address long-standing grievances. According to Catherine Corbett, Wagner Electric also required workers to sign loyalty pledges to the company. Over half of the workforce would walk out the following month with the support of Mother Jones. Workers appealed to a more sympathetic war labor board, but found they could not get the agreements they demanded until the years of industrial organizing of the 1930s. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. You know, a little bit of jambalaya and a little bit of spice in your life is just what you need. We always begin, weather from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the low 50s. Looks like overcast with rain showers at times, just having a bit of a sprinkle right now. Winds out of the south-southwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour, expecting something less than a quarter of an inch of rain today and tonight. We are under an active wind advisory. I did mention that yesterday, and though the bulk of the damaging winds will be further south of us near the Oregon-California border, Medford to Ashland and a little bit beyond there, though we may be getting some severe gusts on occasion here, and with steady winds at 10 to 15, that's pretty stiff for this part of the area. Rain showers, as I mentioned this evening, with clearing overnight, lows in the mid-30s, and winds out of the south-southwest at 5 to 10. Showers tomorrow morning, then partly cloudy in the afternoon with highs in the low 50s, with winds out of the southwest at 10 to 15 miles an hour, bringing with it a little bit more than a tenth of an inch of rain. Confirmed coronavirus cases in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon continue to increase. It stands now at 8,841. The deceased officially stands at 120, so that's been unchanged since the weekend. Pollen is rated as none still right here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is good for the region at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate, standing at 4. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.88 inches. Visibility is still up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 93%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 48 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 47 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 55 and fair. Kyiv is 40 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 55 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong, 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 56 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 48 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 47 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's raining cats and dogs where you're at. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Zeke Miller, Darlene Superville, and Danica Kirka of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. President Joe Biden marked St. Patrick's Day by committing the U.S. to the Good Friday Agreement, which has come under increasing stress following the United Kingdom's exit from the European union. Biden, the latest president of Irish descent, held a virtual meeting with the Ireland Prime Minister. Before the meeting, the president attended a morning mass at the aptly named St. Patrick's Church near his family home in Wilmington, Delaware, then returned to the White House to partake in the St. Paddy's Day celebrations, which were toned down due to the coronavirus pandemic. In keeping with recent tradition, the water in fountains outside the White House ran green for the day. Biden and Prime Minister Martin's virtual bilateral meeting, Biden's third with a foreign leader since he took office 8 weeks ago. Why won't he talk to the press? Included the presentation of an engraved bowl of shamrocks, which was sent ahead to Washington. It ensured that a tradition that began in 1952 continued uninterrupted, if modified by COVID-19 concerns. Biden also dropped in on Vice President Kamala Harris's virtual meeting with Northern Ireland's First Minister, Arlene Foster, and Deputy First Minister Michelle O'Neill in a show of support for the Good Friday Agreement.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Andrew Meldrum of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Sister Janice McLaughlin, a Maryknoll Sisters nun who was jailed and later deported by white minority-ruled Rhodesia for exposing human rights abuses, has died. She was 79. In a life dedicated to social justice, McLaughlin supported the African nationalist struggle that ended Rhodesia and brought Zimbabwe to independence, and she later contributed to the country's education system. She worked in Africa for nearly 40 years and later became president of the Maryknoll Sisters. Born and educated in Pittsburgh, McLaughlin joined the Maryknoll Order in 1961 after working elsewhere in Africa for several years. McLaughlin went in 1977 to the southern African country then known as Rhodesia, which was embroiled in a war by black nationalists to overthrow the white minority regime headed by Prime Minister Ian Smith. Yes. Working for the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace in Zimbabwe, McLaughlin used the church's network across the country to uncover human rights abuses, including the systematic torture of rural blacks and forced settlement of nearly 600,000 in what Rhodesian authorities called protected villages. She reported that the sites were fortified camps patrolled by Rhodesian security forces, densely populated without adequate sanitation or nutrition, and that more than twice as many people were living in them than the government acknowledged. McLaughlin's reports were published by the Catholic Institute for International Affairs. In response, Rhodesian authorities arrested McLaughlin in August of 1977. She was accused of supporting terrorism and held in solitary confinement at the maximum security prison outside the capital, and then after 3 weeks, she was deported. Well, there's more to be read at the link in the show notes, so do. And that also brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Coeur. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.